Blackouts, shutdowns, but we're still here. I'm Charlie Sykes. Sunday Insight starts right now. Good morning and welcome to Sunday Insight. In the week that was, the government stayed shut down, partially. Obamacare gets rolled out, glitches and all. A bizarre shooting incident rattles the nation's capital. The Green Bay Packers get ready to take on their divisional rivals, the Lions, at Lambeau. Speaking of Green Bay, make sure you check the traffic because that bridge that was sagging is still shut down. The stock market also sags after the president says that investors aren't nervous enough about a federal debt default. Legislators hold hearings on the Common Core and Indian nicknames. And the Brewers season finally comes to an end, thank goodness. But we start with the shutdown, a battle over Obamacare and a high-stakes game of political chicken. President Obama met last week with congressional leaders, but there was no progress. The president says he's not going to negotiate with House Republicans on anything. That meant the government stayed in partial shutdown. Benefit checks still went out. Essential government functions continued, but hundreds of thousands of non-essential workers were sent home. And there were scenes like this. The administration ordered the closing of all parks and national monuments and put up barricades at the World War II Memorial, but when a group of Honor Flight veterans showed up, they pushed through the barricades. Now, the House has voted to fund the parks, the National Institute of Health, fund veterans' benefits, pay the National Guard, but Democrats are blocking those measures, saying they have to fund all of government or nothing. Now, joining me on our panel this morning, the Milwaukee Community Journal's Michael Holt, former State Representative Michelle Litchens, and political strategist Lynn DeBruin. Okay, we'll start with this. Michelle Litchens, who is winning this fight? Because the White House says they're winning the fight, are they?
You know what? Actually, when this all started, I did not agree with the Republicans for not passing a continuing resolution. But right now, I actually think the Republicans are gaining the upper hand on this. Because the Democrats are proving that they are putting politics over people. There is absolutely no reason for them not to. The House has passed funding Veterans Affairs, funding the National Institute of Health so that we can give cancer treatments to children that are already in those programs, funding our national parks so that our veterans can actually...
But how long is this going to go on?
This might continue for a little while, unfortunately.
Okay, Lynn DeBruin. First of all, can you explain why it made sense to the Obama administration to shut down that World War II memorial?
No. That was a very strategic mistake, and frankly, those veterans, in all likelihood, would never have a chance to come back. It was one of those glitches that becomes a bigger life because that incenses people.
Was it a glitch, or was it the Washington way? There's something called the Washington Monument Syndrome, where bureaucrats and politicians shut down the most visible, most popular memorials in order to get the public all worried about budget cuts. And didn't they apply that to the World War II memorial?
Well, I think that was part of it. I think some of the leaders thought that if they cause pain to rank and file everyday Americans rather than just the poor who are feeling a lot of pain from this, or just the federal workers, that would push. The problem is, we're right, and this is exactly what happened under Newt Gingrich and President Clinton years ago. And for a while, the president's standing fell, but then it came back up. In the end, the public blamed the Republicans for doing this. 80 Republican congressmen convinced the Speaker of the House to do this.
Well, that was back in the 1990s.
Now I'm sorry, flip back to now. They forced this crisis on the American public, and I don't think the public is so stupid that in the end they're going to buy that somehow it was the Democrats' fault when it was the Republicans that did it.
Michael Holt.
Let me say the exact opposite of what Michelle said. I initially started blaming the Republicans, and I still blame the Republicans. This is nonsensical if you really want to be honest about it. First, they said they were going to hold, that you had to defund Obama. We knew that wasn't going to happen. Now they say delay it for a year. You can't delay it because it already started. It would be total chaos to try to do this. So who's winning the PR battle? There might be a few folks who are upset that Democrats said fund everything or fund nothing. But the overwhelming majority of people, blame Republicans on this, and they're going to pay a price in 2014.
Well, we'll see whether we pay a price on it, and obviously the polls would suggest that Republicans are paying the price. But there were three things that happened this week that made me think that maybe the dynamic was changing a little bit. Number one was the optics of this World War II memorial, which, by the way, just violated common sense because, first of all, it took more workers to close it, to put the barricades down than to open it. It was open air, so it looked petty. It was to this shutdown what the president's decision to stop the tours of the White House was for the sequester. Remember the sequester? Remember what a big deal the sequester was going to be? Second was the overheated rhetoric that we're getting. I mean, you're hearing the Democrats, comparing Republicans to terrorists, to jihadists. Generally, when you're winning something, you don't ramp up the rhetoric. And then finally, these votes that Michelle was talking about. Every single day, you have Democrats have to take a stand. And so you had, for example, Gwen Moore this week vote to deny funding for veterans benefits, vote to deny funding for the parks, vote to deny funding for the National Institutes of Health, and then announcing she was going to keep her salary. And, trust me, at a certain point, that is not a winning strategy, Michael.
Yeah, but I think most people are, can figure out the problem with picking and choosing, cherry picking which things you fund and which things you don't fund. There comes a point where it is absurd and ridiculous, such as the veterans and the children with the cancer trials and whatever. But if the Democrats and the president all cave and you individually fund pieces of the government, that's not an appropriate way to fund government. You guys are saying the exact same thing that in reverse as to what happened with our state capital. Everyone got upset at the Democrats were leaving, and now the Republicans are leaving.
What is the role of Congress? Is it supposed to be a rubber stamp? Is it just supposed to raise the debt limit?
No, but if you don't like what happens, you don't go home. No, but that's exactly what the Democrats did in Madison, and you didn't like that either.
The Republicans are trying to negotiate. They're trying to make.
No, they're trying to
move forward on
negotiate
a few of these
Obamacare.
issues. We're going to be discussing the debt
But
ceiling in the
they
very
don't
near
understand
future.
about no. He said no. I mean, it was clear English.
Okay, well, that was the other thing. And again, part of the optics here, the President of the United States is so confident, maybe even cocky about this, that he says, I will negotiate with the Iranians, I will negotiate with the North Koreans, but I'm not going to negotiate with the elected representatives of the American people. That he's willing to negotiate with just about every thug dictator in the world, but he is not willing to negotiate with the House of Representatives. Okay, let's go around the table. How long is this going to last, the shutdown?
I would say at least another couple of weeks.
Yeah, what do you think?
I'll give it a couple weeks, too.
I give it less than 20 days.
I think it probably 2 weeks. I would go longer, except that it's going to run up against the debt ceiling, and they got to solve that. Okay, what has your glass half full? What has your glass half empty this week? Let's go around the table. Michael Holt.
Well, according to Shirley, the glass is half full because this is not a shutdown. This is a partial shutdown. Of course, that's $80 million being lost every day, and how many? Almost 1 million people unemployed. So I'd say it's definitely half empty. The government is shut down, being held hostage.
Michelle Hitchens.
My glass is half full because we've learned exactly how many non-essential government workers we have. Like 95% of the Department of Education are non-essential. But my glass is half empty because eventually they are all going to go back to work.
Okay, Lynn.
Well, my glass is half full because 10 days ago, Milwaukee County Executive Chris Abele released his 2014 no tax increase budget. Sounds great, but my glass is half empty because just a few days later, his fiscal staff had to announce that they goofed with their math. It's $1.5 million short, and they don't have a plan to restore that money that doesn't use guaranteed non-tax levy.
Well, my glass is half empty because U.S. Senator Tammy Baldwin, Democrat of Wisconsin, announced earlier this week that because of the law and Senate rules that she was shutting down her office. They wouldn't answer phones, wouldn't answer emails, would not help constituents. My glass is half full because Senator Ron Johnson says there is no rule, there is no law, and his office is going to be open for business. Next on Sunday Insight, Obamacare is here, glitches and all. Okay, so that didn't go very well. The first few days of the Obamacare exchanges were plagued by long waits, computer glitches, and lots of frustration. After the first 2 days, some states reported that not one person had gotten through to sign up for the exchanges. Now, President Obama said not to worry and compared the launch problems to glitches in Apple's new iPhone operating system. Yeah. Now, Michael was concerned about, chaos with Obamacare, but I mean, some of us thought it was going to be a train wreck, but we did not think it was going to be this craptacular. Were you surprised?
No, because in 2006, when Bush
because
rolled...
I told you so.
No. When Bush rolled out the changes to Medicare D, they had some of the exact same problems. The technology was inadequate. People were misinformed. People were disinformed. There were people falling through the cracks. Implementing a massive health program at a national scale is a problem. Did I think it was going to be this bad the first few days? No, but I do think they'll get it rectified. It's just every individual situation people are going to have to hang tough and wait it out.
Michelle Hitchens.
So they had unlimited resources, and they had years to work on putting this together, and this is the government, for goodness sakes. I think we expected a little bit more than this, but on such a bigger scale, this is a huge problem. When we heard John McAfee actually talk about this being a hacker's wet dream, is what he said. I think the scary part of this is that you are going to, because this is so unorganized, anyone can put themselves out on the internet as a broker for insurance. You can be filling in information, personal, intimate information about yourself for health insurance, and it can be a scam, and these hackers can be taking advantage of you.
Michael, wouldn't the last 4 or 5 days suggest that maybe Obamacare was not ready for prime time, that maybe they should have delayed it, that maybe you could have avoided this if you'd actually gotten it right before you dumped it on the American public?
Well, you could take the half-full analysis and say, you know what, the government was flooded with so many calls seeking insurance that it, corrupted the system. I don't think y'all going to buy that, though, right?
I don't even think you're going to buy that.
But again, and you talked about this for years and years and years.
Yes.
We're talking about the government.
The government.
What do you expect from the government?
Okay, whoa, Michael,
I'm just saying,
Michael, you were in favor of Obamacare.
I am.
You like the idea.
I am.
Okay, so in other words, you are okay with turning your healthcare system over to the people who run the DMV. But the problem is the DMV actually works, unlike Obamacare. No, I think, look, they're going to get these software problems fixed. They're going to get the glitches fixed sooner or later. But the problem with Obamacare is not a software problem, it's a policy problem. This just gives you a taste of the fact that the government bureaucracy, frankly, sucks when it comes to putting together something like this. It is too big, it is too complicated, and there are too many unforeseen consequences. And I think it is absolutely stunning that with the hundreds of millions of dollars, the 2 years run-up, all the eyes on it, all of the political stakes, that it would have been this truly awful. And this is just the beginning.
Well, they said the same thing about Social Security. And just about every rollout, every time you have a new program, you enter this period of chaos.
But this is now a mandatory, massive program that every person in the United States is supposed to be participating in and interacting with. So this is on a whole different level.
And right now, people are only seeing the negatives. And I agree that what they did was they planned for a computer system that would have way less interaction on it than it did. Well, that can maybe give you like a 30% break on it. The rest of it is just pure screw up.
Worst analogy of the week, the president comparing this to Apple, because you know what? Apple actually has a track record of success, unlike the federal bureaucracy. Now, you may not want to hear it, but we're going to tell you anyway, so let's hand out some unsolicited advice. Michael Holt, you're first.
Well, if you really want to get to the root of all of this controversy, a friend of mine, Gerald Wayne Coleman, said that if Obamacare or if President Obama advocated for oxygen, most Republicans would suffocate themselves. So I get some advice. I mean, that's the reality. I get some advice, Republicans. You need to stop this roadblock, this hostage-taking situation.
Michelle Litchins.
Well, I think we all need to listen to Pope Francis. He said something very smart this last week. He did not say give Caesar more money so Caesar can take care of the poor. The Pope said we need to take care of the poor, and I think that's all advice we should heed.
Linda Bruin.
Well, my advice is for the United States government to enact the same type of legislation that Israel has in funding their government. In Israel, if Parliament doesn't adopt a budget 6 months into that budget year, every single member of Parliament faces immediate re-election. And guess what? The minute they pass that law, not a single member of Parliament has tried to shut down the government since.
My unsolicited advice to President Obama, Vice President Biden, do not mess with World War II veterans. They've seen a lot worse. Next on Sunday Insight, what kind of credit is Governor Walker getting for creating jobs in Wisconsin? We're number one. Well, maybe. The Philadelphia Federal Reserve's latest economic report suggests that Wisconsin's economy is the fastest growing in the entire country. Now, if that's news to you, join the club. When the same study by the same outfit, the Philadelphia Fed, ranked Wisconsin low earlier this year, the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel headlined the bad news. But when the numbers started to turn around, the paper decided the Philadelphia Fed stories numbers were no longer reliable or newsworthy. When Wisconsin was ranked 49th, it was front page news. When it rose to number 5, then number 2, then number 1, no stories. Governor Walker, though, obviously thinks it's a big deal, saying this is just another sign that Wisconsin's economic future looks bright. We're creating jobs at levels that have not been seen in over a decade and are setting records this year in job growth. Michael Holt, what do you make of this Philadelphia Fed story?
If we can assume everything is true, it's a remarkable turnaround in 6 months, because we're talking about April when we're at the bottom and now here you know, 6 months later, they were number one. You know, one of the stories, interesting stories I read was a Madison newspaper who said that state Democrats were running around with clippings in April saying, you know, nothing's working.
From the Philadelphia Fed.
Right, and now they're asking these Democrats, what are you going to talk about? What they're going to talk about is the governor's statement that he will create 250,000 jobs, which I thought was impossible from the onset. But now they're going to hammer that because that has to be their issue.
Okay, so is this a big story or is it not a big story? 49th, it was front page news. Number one, and by the way, the state Democratic Party is running around saying that Wisconsin manufacturers and commerce should not be allowed to run ads touting these Philadelphia Fed numbers.
This is a big story, and I think the most exciting part of the story is that when you talk, so it's going to take a while to actually reach everyone out there who's unemployed and who's underemployed.
Yeah.
But when you talk to business owners, I just talked to a plumber at my house a couple days ago. He's working 70 to 80 hours a week. He was just offered a house. He hasn't done new construction in years. I met with another company that supplies manufacturers, and they are located all over the country. He said Wisconsin is the only state where they are growing right now. So businesses are growing, and the economy is growing in Wisconsin.
Okay.
You know, I do want our economy to be growing, but this is news in a different way than Michelle's saying, at least to me. The Philadelphia Fed put out a press release last week. It was one of the few times they've ever done it in their history, saying that that ad by the Wisconsin manufacturers and Walker's characterization of their statistical analysis is not accurate, and that it misleads people into thinking that they had ranked states like #1 in the nation, #2 in the nation, and that is not how their statistics are supposed to be used. So my beef with this is not that I don't think the economy is growing. I think it is. My beef with this is that the ad and Walker are misusing, they're misinforming the public about that research. Do it on its own merits, but don't twist a study that was never intended to be used that way.
What is fascinating, though, is that this was out for months and months and months, and when it was bad, the Philadelphia Fed never put out a press release when the Democrats were running around, never put out a press release when the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel was touting it.
Really what was happening.
Now, what I think is these numbers obviously are always a little bit soft, but there's no question that what these numbers show, and because they look at a whole bunch of different numbers, housing starts and jobless numbers, whether you're first, second, or third, clearly what's happened is that the Wisconsin economy is turning around. Now, whether it's #1 in the country or #5 in the country, who knows? I don't know, and maybe that number is a little bit slightly misleading. But what's obvious is that something's happening here, that this state is growing. Now, of course, we're still held hostage by everything that's happening nationally, but it's obviously good news. I just find it fascinating, though, when the news media decides that a study is big news when it matches their favorite narrative, and then they ignore it when it doesn't match their narrative, and this is almost a classic case. So is what they said this week the same thing that you heard? Let's go around the table. Michael Holt, what did they say?
Well, two Milwaukee aldermen blasted Time Warner earlier this week, or last week, because Time Warner has decided to convert several other local channels to digital. And the alderman said this will come with a price tag. What they were really saying, if you listen closely enough, is a couple of years ago, the state took over negotiations with cable companies and took some of the money. If we still had local control, they could control Time Warner. Guess again, but at least that's what they're saying.
Michelle Litchens.
Well, what they said this week in Washington was that you need a computer and you need the internet and you must purchase health insurance. But what we've heard for the past couple years is that it's too much to ask you to have proof of ID to vote.
Linda Brunn.
Well, when Speaker John Boehner said that he was disappointed that the president won't negotiate on the budget deal, first on Obamacare and then on the debt ceiling, etc., what I heard him really say was, look, Mr. President, I created this crisis by caving into the demands of extremist Republican senators and congressmen, and I will continue this crisis to protect my leadership position.
Well, President Obama compared the problems with Obamacare to the problems that Apple had when it rolled out his iPhone. What I heard was the president really has no idea what the difference between the private sector and a private business and government actually is. Next on Sunday Inside, our panel picks the winners and losers of the week. And first, here's your morning news update.